to the session on the future of leadership for Flexpo Business. I'm Ursula Tavender and I'm the head of content here at Flexpo Business and Flexpo, and I'm really thrilled to be joined today by Kate Cooper, who is the head of policy, research and standards at the Institute of Leadership and Management, and Paul Hamer, who's the CEO at Sir Robert McAlpine. So Kate, it's great to see you, and I would love to hand over to you at this point to give yourself a proper introduction to the audience.
Okay, thanks Ursula. It's great to be here, and I've been really looking forward to this conversation for a while. Yes, I'm head of research, head of research policy and standards at the Institute of Leadership and Management. We're a professional body representing a community of over 40,000 leaders and managers, predominantly in the UK, but we have members literally from all over the world. And what we try to do, as well as say, yes, let's take leadership and management seriously, why don't you evidence that by joining us? We undertake research about issues that are really important to the everyday practice of leadership and management in organisations. So there will be things about, can we really live our values? Does flexible working really work for everybody? We did some research recently about the impact of banter in the office. It's the very much the daily experience of leading and management is where we like to focus our attention and indeed campaign about things that we care about. And one of the things we do really care about and have done for a number of years is flexible working.
Thanks so much, Kate, and I can't wait to hear your insights. Paul, over to you. Can you give us a bit of a whistle-stop tour of Paul Hamer, please?
Yeah, I'll do my best. So, welcome everybody. So my name's Paul Hamer. I'm the Chief Executive of Sir Robert McAlpine. We were a business that was established in 1869, so we've just enjoyed our 150-year anniversary. We're a family-owned business, which makes us very different to lots of other construction builders out there, and very proud of the work that we've done and the influence that we've created across the UK. And I would say that our job is to change skylines, but by changing skylines, what we're trying to do is change communities and influence society. And certainly by the work that we do, and hopefully the positive footprint that we leave behind, we're hoping that we're pushing the agendas that we're all after in terms of social interaction, better working, and particularly around the workplace, making sure that everybody feels comfortable to bring their total best self to work. And I've been passionate about that, not only in recent times, but right through my career, because if you've got people who are bringing their best self every single day, you're going to have the best organisation performing every day. So, you know, it's nice and simple for me. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I'm probably delighted that it's now got in my view, a national standing and footing where people are really starting to take it seriously. And I'm really excited about perhaps the changes we can make right across the country.
Thanks, Paul. I think that's such a valid point. You know, nobody would have wished for a human tragedy on this scale to propel a humanisation of leadership and workplaces, and you know, the acceleration of more businesses thinking about how they can encourage people to bring their best and whole selves to work in this way. But if there was ever to be a silver lining, then I think it is potentially that, isn't it? You know, and this year has really seen people connect on a completely different level, hasn't it? So likewise, I'm really excited about this conversation about the future of leadership and how that evolves from here. But kick off then, I'm really interested in your views about, you know, what you've taken from this time, first of all, and what are the biggest lessons that you've learned so far this year? Paul, if I can come to you first on that and then get your views in a moment, Kate.
Yeah, well, you're never too old to learn, are you? I think that old adage about paradigms and challenging paradigms, or they're being challenged for you. I think what we've seen and what we've been through is certainly nothing that you could have planned for. And actually, you know, as an engineering business at heart, you look back in history, and engineers are people who solve problems. And our business is fantastic when faced with problems. So I think firstly, what have we learned? We've learned that everything can be challenged. Absolutely everything. There is nothing that you shouldn't look at and think about. Could you do it a different way? Could you change things in a better manner? And certainly it accelerates some of the things that we've been thinking about anyway. And you know, we work in an industry that is quite a slow adopter. You know, when you look at some of the changes that you've tried to push through and don't come through, things like this, you know, recessions tend to make businesses change, but this pandemic has not only been about business impact, it's been about social impact, it's been about technology. You know, we didn't think our technology would hold up, but it did. We didn't think our people would be able to work and function properly, they could. So for me, it's been a whole host of paradigms and almost things that you couldn't touch that actually we've just had to unpack, rethink, put back together. And you know, the key thing for me, the learning I think I've taken is never underestimate the people that you employ, because they are absolutely ingenious when they have to be to come up and solve these types of challenges.
I love that. I think this time has really proved to people what they're capable of as well, hasn't it? So I guess from a kind of, you know, future organisational resilience point of view, that has to be such a really positive thing. Kate, over to you next. What have you learned from this time?
Well, I think what I've learned, really, to pick on what Paul was saying, is how people can learn. You hear of 94-year-olds hosting their first Zoom meetings, and this introduction or quick introduction of home working, I actually think if the government had said, you know, 2 years ago, we're going to have everybody working at home for 3 months in 2020, can you imagine the feasibility studies, the project plans, all of the reasons why we could not possibly do this in less than a decade? Or, you know, even the best estimates would have been a year. But once the will is there in people, once they see that it matters and they have influence over what happens, they're incredible in how quickly they can learn, how quickly they can adapt, and how learning has been the way out of this. I've got to learn how to use this technology. I've got to learn how to run online meetings. I've got to learn how to do things so differently. So that to me has been just cause for huge celebration. But also, I think what it has really brought home to managers is how diverse and different are the circumstances in which people live their lives. There's none of that leaving your domestic self at the office door, going through the gates and all of a sudden being the work person, because we're there in people's houses with their children and their cats, their dogs and their toasters. We're seeing that they're sharing workspace with teenagers or partners. And we're also getting an insight in how they manage their day, their whole day. And if ever there was an emphasis on you've got to manage the individual, policies and procedures won't do that. You have to understand the individual, empathise with them, understand their situation, genuinely ask questions and listen to the answers. And that tells us how to get the best out of them. And I think that's what's really, really brought home, you know, seeing that insight into people's homes. Gosh, aren't we all different?
Yeah. And that's deepened relationships, hasn't it? And changed the way that people interact and engage with each other, which I think, again, is a very exciting aspect of what's been happening. So Kate, what's the latest research saying about how leadership is responding and what kind of what support people need moving forward to develop the right sort of skills and behaviours to capitalise on all of what we've just talked about?
Well, the most recent research we did, it seemed to be the older you are, the more you embrace flexible working or home working as a generalisation. And if you think about that, younger people, not only are they much more likely to have less extravagant home spaces, they might be in shared accommodation, so they're finding it much more difficult. Men living on their own really seem to miss the office. Again, you can understand that in your 20s, you're going to work for many of the social benefits that work brings. We found people, though, the benefits that people were finding in terms of not being distracted, being able to flex their working day, being able to use different sorts of technology in a way, you know, when you have to learn how to do something because it's imperative. And yes, they have, and yes, they've done it. And the people who were saying, oh, you just can't have a meeting, it's not the same if you're not in the same room, are now saying, oh yes, you can. I think some of my favourite stories that we've heard by the, you know, the open questions in the research is where people have said, my manager said I could never work at home because I wouldn't be as productive. Not only am I working at home, I am more productive. Because of that, even the benefits of, you know, being able to flex your day have been long known, but that feeling, that control over your working day, you can get up at 6 and do a couple of hours, you can, means that you're so much happier, you're so much more in control. So we found a lot of links to home working and the potential adverse impact on mental health, and that did seem very much to be about the individual situation, of course, of the people who were responding. And as I said, you know, young men living on their own really do seem to want to get back to the office. We also found in the response and in the discussions that followed on publishing the research, how personality and personal preference seems to be driving so many of the decisions that people are making. So, for example, if some senior leadership teams, senior leaders love being with people around them and they like standing up with a pen and they like the talking, they don't like long emails, they want everyone back in the office. Whereas the ones that are actually perhaps more introverted, much more comfortable with the written word, they're going, no, this is great, let's all stay at home. And that, to me, you know, as background in research as I have, there never seems to be any evidence for this. It's always about what I like. You know, you'll hear about some chief execs have said, well, it's really good if we all don't do any emails after 5 o'clock. Well, mind you, that works brilliantly for them. But for some people, that might cause them real stress and anxiety. So I know you, Ursula, you say it a lot, we both say it a lot. Flexible work is only flexible if it's flexible. And the moment you start producing guidelines for the regulation of flexible working, you might as well say, we don't do it.
Well, I think it looks different for everybody, doesn't it? And that's the key. And, you know, I talk about this a lot with companies that, you know, equity doesn't mean offering the same thing to everybody, and sometimes that is a really difficult thing for particularly managers to get their heads around, because a real stumbling block can be, you know, well, we can't offer this because we can't offer it to everyone. So, you know, and or we take the same approach with everyone. But Paul, I know that you've been on such a journey at Sir Robert McAlpine with flexible working and to change the culture, and I'd really kind of like to talk to you about your, you know, how you've created that culture at Sir Robert McAlpine, and what are the values that you hold close to you, and how that defines the way that you lead.
Sure, and it's quite interesting because at one end we have Kate said it before, our workforce and our staff, they're not a homogeneous mass. They're 2,500 individuals that have all got very different circumstances. Some have worked for the company for 40 years, some have worked for the company for 4 months, and you can't try and create rules for those people. It just doesn't work. So we created a fairly set of values. Obviously, family is very important to us because we're a family-owned business, but as a leader, honesty, being honourable, respect, inclusion, and you kind of put that all together. My style is about trust. Trust equals output. So when I've assembled leadership teams together and people have said, where do you want me to be based? What do you want me to do? Da-da-da. I'm not interested. You go wherever you need to go. You do whatever you need to do, and you organise yourselves in a way that delivers the outputs that we've agreed that you need to do to contribute to the business. And once somebody in a senior position starts to amplify that message, you know, I'm a flexible worker. I travel, you know, I used to travel before the current issues, but I flex my week and I work from home because thinking time and catching up and strategizing and reading documents uninterrupted is really quite important. So I go and tell people that I work from home. So if it can work for me as an individual, why can't it work? Why can't it work for others? And then, although we don't try and put rules in place, we do hardwire some of that mentality. So we've got my executive leadership team, we've got a leadership charter. Part of our measures are behavioural measures. So it's not just about, did we deliver our business results? It's, Did we collaborate in the way? Did we share knowledge? Did we amplify the way that we want to run and lead our business? And then similarly, we cascade that down through all our employees in our building individual performance, where we get them to talk and set their own objectives about how do they want to work differently, how could they make themselves more productive. We've got two challenges, one very easy, one slightly more difficult, in that all our office-based people, we can flex quite easily and we can work with them to shape that role. Very different when we've got 800 people on a construction site working and driving to a programme that need to be there every day, or so we thought need to be there every day, but actually some of the research that is being conducted at the moment will help us to think about how can we shift people through cycles. So we might not be able to get them working from home because they might be a construction supervisor, but can we shift them through where they do 2 days on, 2 days off, and cycle them through in a different way to put their role around them. So I think the final thing that we've been looking at is, I talked about this bringing your best self, and Kate talked about, the amount of people's wives, sons and daughters that I now know through all these calls. I mean, it's just amazing. But you know what? It makes you feel more connected to these people. It makes you understand the pressures that you don't see when they're sat in the office with you. And we've been running affinity groups to try, and 7 affinity groups to try and give this message out that everybody is welcome at Sir Robert McAlpine. And I think the flex working, the added dimension of seeing people in their own domestic environment, for me, that's just another layer of richness to put on to understand the people that we're working with. And so through all that, I get that trust. And Kate mentioned about trust earlier. If you're worried about you can't trust your people because you can't see them, then either you've got a problem or you're employing the wrong people. It's really simple.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, isn't it, that actually that becomes quite a question, isn't it, to people. How do we trust people? And it's something that I think is so fundamental and so intrinsically linked with the successful implementation of flexible working, and how we create that environment where it is safe for people to demand that autonomy and expect it, because it's the way they can deliver their best, isn't it? So what can leaders do to make it safe for people to bring their whole selves to work, beyond we've already talked about how great it is for people in connection with people being able to see so much more of each other's lives, but moving out of the emergency situation where everybody was working from home, how can we moving forward create that as organisations?
I think Paul's highlighted quite a good and legitimate tension between some people can work at home and might never ever have to leave their home office, and others just can't, and they work for the same organisation. And what you don't want is to feel that somehow home workers are winners and the got to attend site or offices are the losers, because that's not going to do your company any good whatsoever. Similarly, even some people who could work from home want to go into the office. So I think what's really important is that you are so transparent about what the expectations of everybody are, and that has to be articulated in terms of outcomes and expectations, not in terms of geographical location and hours on a clock. And I think it's interesting, Paul's example there, once you started flexing and thinking, actually, do you know what, we can do things differently. You can do lots of things differently. It's not just this is switching to a home office from a work office. He said, do you know what, we could have the example that Paul's given. We are great at change when it makes business sense. We are great at change when that's what people want, to be their best selves. So I think that's a really important, it's a tension, but the more open and honest and transparent you are about it, and the more you get role modelling throughout the organisation, the more successful it's going to be.
I agree. And to your point about the emergence of this kind of dual culture of the people at home and the people on site or in the office, I think from a leadership perspective, there's a real point of focus here, isn't there, that we don't create division between people working differently. So, you know, perhaps it would be great if we could explore that now then from a, you know, from a leadership point of view. What would your advice be around maintaining a cohesive culture when people are going to be working in blended ways and potentially carrying on working remotely for the foreseeable where they can? Paul, if I can come to you first on that one, and then I'll get your thoughts, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. And Kate's right. You know, positive tension is a really good thing in an organisation as long as it's transparent. And that division, if you like, we always comes back. The first thing that we've been doing as an organisation is defining why. Why would we do this? Why do we want to do this? And what are the benefits that could flow from this? If everybody understands why, you can then get into the idiosyncrasies of how do we do it, what does it mean for us, etc., etc. But many organisations jump straight into what and how, and that's where that division comes, where it's not explained, and you get this winner-loser syndrome. So we've explained to our people, why would we want to do this? Well, you know, very simple. We want our organisation to be the most high-performing organisation it can be. And to do that, it needs to be fueled by every single one of our employees who's performing at exactly that same level. So getting somebody who's office-based, but they want to work from home because it helps them they can pick their children up, they can flex their working day, as Kate was saying, they bring their best self, they become more efficient, more productive, and people understand that we can do that quite quickly. When we talk to our site teams and to our fantastic project construction managers, we're actually asking them to solve why. We're not sitting in this ivory tower as leaders going, you know what, I've got a great idea about how I can run your site better. Well, they probably built more construction sites than, you know, I've had hot dinners. So we actually put the why to them, and when they understand that, we get our experts to tell us how could they go about it. And that's the work that we're doing at the moment. They understand, it's their job, that their challenge for Flex is more difficult than it would be for people who are office based. But actually what we've done is empowered them and said, okay, well, let's work together, let's think about how we can do it, and you design you design an approach that actually gives us the outputs that we're looking. And as soon as you empower people like that, this division has gone. All they recognise is one part of your organisation can satisfy why slightly faster, just because it's so much simpler. So there's no division. It's just we're moving towards the end point at slightly different paces.
It's such a valid point, Paul, and it speaks to the experience that I've had working with businesses that have found a challenge in respect of changing the culture around flexible working, because they have taken that kind of company-wide approach and they've implemented a policy or introduced guidelines around how it should work. And then people across the business have gone, well, it won't work for me. They disengage completely. And what we've done is implemented much, you know, created microcultures, if you like, for flexible working, because it does look different for every team and every function, doesn't it? And I think when you give people the opportunity to have those open conversations and contribute to that, you know, shaping that future of the way they work, because like you said, they know best, don't they? And they do their job day in and day out, and they know what's possible if they're given the chance to have an open discussion about, you know, what do we need to deliver? You know, how does that fit with the, you know, what we need to incorporate into our week from a personal point of view? Where's the middle ground? What's possible for us as a team? What do we all need to make it work, and how can we move forward? And that's been so successful, and the impact of that is just incredible, because people come along with you on the journey of change, don't they, when they feel like they're part of it, and actually that has an enormous value in terms of building trust, not only between teams but upwards with leaders too. So yeah, I just I could talk to you about this all day, but Kate, what are your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think additionally, you're probably your best advocates for home working are those that aren't doing it but understand the business sense of it happening for some people. And that is about having a real high level of trust and respect in your senior teams. So if the people who are unable to have their teams home working are able to explain articulately why it makes business sense, there isn't a problem. I think it's when people sort of hide in their own silo or in their own function, and that resentment won't work for us, just as you've given the example. And then that resentment, again, it's role models, isn't it? It cascades through the whole function. So as long as everybody's, and that's back to transparency, if we know why we're doing it, as Paul have said, and we can articulate that in a way that everybody understands, the problem's not there.
Yeah, that's such food for thought. I'd like to talk now with you both about recruitment and looking ahead to retention too, in a future that is, you know, we're navigating a pandemic which is obviously here with us for a while. But how important do you both see flexible working as, you know, in terms of a strategy that a business has to recruit and retain great people? Kate, what do you think about this, first of all?
Well, our research that we did a few years ago identified talent management as a big benefit of flexible working. You just cast your net wider. So that is one of the immediate advantages. We also know how people love it, and they will take less salary in order to be able to flex their day. But I think what we have found from this pandemic particularly, and you're already reading in the newspapers, that if you're only commuting 1 or 2 days a week, you can go much further. And actually, we have a much more global, if you like, recruitment place. I was talking to somebody last week who's moving to France, and okay, the aeroplanes are going to have to be functioning properly, but she's already saying, well, I can fly back once every couple of weeks back to the UK, not a problem. And I think that has been a real change in mindset. And I think the benefit for the younger people who are feeling isolated and a bit bereft because they don't have these workplaces is, do you know, you can work virtually anywhere now and people get it. And I think that's a real positive. And of course, from an organisation point of view, look at the talent, the diversity of people that we can say, come and work with us. And we know how to make it good work for them because we've all been practising since March.
Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. So again, as part of our journey and the badge or banner, if you like, about everyone is welcome. I think one of the key things going forward in recruitment is if you're going to be bringing people in and you're going to be very flexible, so you're always going to be creating a role around individuals rather than vice versa, making sure that they're landing in an organisation that already has that culture. So, you know, what we don't want to do is have an organisation that doesn't flex and start bringing new people in who are suddenly working in a flexible manner.
Yeah.
Again, we're back to tension. So we need to prepare the ground. But as Kate said, when we've looked much wider and we've started thinking about where are our talent pools, because our traditional talent pools are drying up, as one would probably know. Once you start looking at those wider talent pools and then adding in flexible working, the depth of potential employees that you've got is enormous. And actually, it makes business sense back to the why. Two, in this sort of aggressive push for talent that will continue for a period of time, you are going to have to offer it anyway. I think people joining your organisation will be questioning very hard about your culture. How can they fit their life around their working life? So I think it'll become a necessity ultimately. But we're trying to hopefully get ahead of the game alongside some of the other things that we're doing. But it will be imperative. And you know, as you think about the virtual world that we've been moving into, not only through COVID, but the technology, everything that you can do on your phone, wherever you are in the world. This is just, for me, just an extension and a continuation of it. So it has to be a fundamental plank of our recruitment policy going forward, not only for retention, but absolutely for attraction.
Yeah.
I think it just opens up so many possibilities for people and for businesses, doesn't it? And, you know, we talk a lot about the access to work and the possibilities that are opened up when you change your recruitment process to make it very clear that it is possible at any point to work flexibly for anyone, no matter what their personal circumstances or who they are or where they come from. And that changes how people see your organisation. It changes how people view your culture from within and externally, and it just gives more access to work for more people, and that then makes organisations better, doesn't it? Because with richer decision making and more diversity, we are all better. We all benefit from that. So I just, to wrap up then, I'd really be interested to know, and I'm sure this would be quite a challenging one to answer, because if there was just one piece of advice that you could share with other leaders, what would it be? Kate, if I come to you first on this one.
Well, it's interesting. In the early research we did, that people complained about email overload and flexible workers. And that curious thing that if somebody's not in the office, you think, I know, I'll send them an email. If that was a friend that hadn't turned up at the rugby club or wherever, you would never say, oh, Paul's not here, I must drop him an email. You'd phone him, you'd speak to him, you'd arrange to see him. So I think what people have got so much better at, and not our research, some other research that I've been reading about a couple of weeks ago, more social gatherings are happening online, people are having more meetings, because they're now getting really good at connecting virtually. So I think if there was one thing that people need to hold on to, in my opinion, is that enhanced ability to relate. Keep working on it. You never get perfect at it, do you? But you can keep working at relating and getting better at getting on with your colleagues. You don't have to like them necessarily, it's always a bonus, but you do have to trust, respect, and have a relationship with them.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the key messages that I'll take from this year, that, it's that connection, isn't it? And how that enhances not only how you feel connected as somebody who is working virtually or working in a blend of ways, but also as being part of an organisation and part of a team and leading a team of people. I think it just changes everything, and it changes how we work and how we interact with each other. Paul, what would your piece of advice be to other leaders?
Yeah, you have to be careful giving advice to other leaders, don't you?
I know.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say two little sound bites. One, engage your people in whether there is a true why for your organisation, because there might not be for every organisation, but engage your people and determine if there's a real why in this, and if there is, they will help solve it and drive business benefit, but there'll be individual benefit for employees. So I would at least urge people to engage. The second piece of advice that's really struck home to me is flexible working or working from home isn't remote working. It's just a point that Kate's made. Yes, we're interacting in a different way, but as I said earlier, I know more about my leadership team and wider business and the people I interact with now than I did when I was meeting them 5 days a week in the office, because I know their wife, their dogs, they have their children sat on their lap, and you know what, you get a richer sense of that individual, and also you get an ability to understand the pressures that they're under, which aren't necessarily work pressures. And I just think as a team, it just makes you gel better, it makes you respect each other better, and ultimately you work better. So, let's make sure that we do understand it's not remote working. Just because we aren't face to face, it doesn't mean we can't interact in a rich manner.
What a way to end a phenomenal conversation. But thank you so much for being with us today, and we will see you very soon.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the second part of our Future of Leadership series. I'm honoured to be joined today by two of the most inspirational leaders in the UK. I've got David Blackburn, the Chief People Officer of the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, and Alex Fleming, who is the President and Country Head of Adecco Group UK and Ireland. Thank you both very much for joining us.
Thank you, Maddy. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you both too. So both individuals have led their organisations to win multiple awards for their inclusive cultures and their people initiatives. So who better to lead us on the Future of Leadership fireside chat today? So without further ado, I'd like to kick off, if I may, by talking about the response that your organisation had to the pandemic. So David, shall we start with you?
Yes, thank you, Maddy. So I think one of the things that has been really successful at the Financial Services Compensation Scheme is the speed with which we responded to the crisis. And our ability to do that and to be able to work and mobilise in such an agile way was really to do with our historic investment both in technology and in flexibility. So at the FSCS, our starting point is that every single job in the organisation is flexible, which meant that, when we went into lockdown, the speed with which we were able to reorganise our day-to-day working practices is something that myself and the board are hugely proud of. We haven't had to furlough any staff. We haven't lost a day of productivity. And we are already seeing, as a result of the crisis, unprecedented claims volumes, the highest number of claims being processed since the financial crash in 2008, 2009. In fact, at this point in the year, we've already processed as many claims as we processed during the whole of the previous financial year, 2019-20. And so I think that a real learning for us has been that, creating the right sort of flexible working environment has been central to allowing the organisation to respond at speed. I think the second thing about our response, of which I am proud, is the work that we have done to keep people connected to the organisation and engaged with our social purpose. And we know from the pulse surveys that we have run during since March, including our annual engagement survey, which we ran in May, that against this, incredibly unprecedented backdrop, we are both delivering exceptional performance to our customers. Customer satisfaction is at 85%. Currently, that's the highest it's ever been. And we have the highest ever employee engagement. And I think because we've worked to keep people connected, to regularly communicate and be very transparent about our approach. We told the organisation in May that we wouldn't expect people to return to our central London office location until September. We've last week spoken to the organisation to say that that's going to be a phased return that begins from next month with evolved flexible working principles. So I guess what I'd say in conclusion is that we were really lucky that we'd already thought about how flexibility enables us to deliver our best organisational performance before we went into lockdown, which meant that we were able to mobilise at speed.
That's really phenomenal to have had record numbers of work for your team to deal with and to do that remotely. And I think you've kind of answered my next question, which was going to be, are there things that you plan to carry on that you've evolved to change in terms of your flexible working agenda to be able to continue to be so successful? Are there any kind of key things within that you could share with our audience?
Yes, I mean, again, I think that with the fact that we weren't starting from a blank sheet of paper was incredible. And actually, last week I did a series of virtual town hall communications to the whole organisation with our CEO, Caroline Rainbird. And what we said was, you already knew that we had a set of flexible working principles. What we've done is say, actually, what does the response to the crisis mean for those principles? And which of those things do we think continue to be true? And which things do we think actually need to change? Now, what was really interesting is that our principles are probably about 18 months to 2 years old. And so they were really prescriptive. So actually they were very much sort of saying, and you will do this, and you'll have some work to do when you're at home, and you'll tell your boss where you are. And they were very, very directive. Well, of course, that's actually what we've all been doing since March. So actually we were like, we don't really need to say some of this stuff, do we? Actually, we're all adults, and we've got, so with some of these things actually we just let go of. We said, actually, we don't, some of this stuff now is just the way we work. And so actually I don't think we need to call it out in quite the same way. The big thing that's changed is that our principal used to say, and we think it's important for you to spend a reasonable amount of time in the office. And we've now spent some time thinking about, well, what does that actually mean? What does reasonable look like? And so at FSCS, we now have what we call our new 40-40 rule. So our definition of reasonable is 40% of our people working in the office 40% of their time. And so by Christmas, on our phased return that starts next month, you can tell I'm already in the office. We'll be at about a third of the organisation will be back working in some sort of hybrid way, so spending some of their time in the office, some of their time working from home. And also the second key point, and I'm sure Alex might mention the fantastic research that the Adecco group have recently done, Resetting Normal. And when Alex shared it with me, it's something that I've been quoting, using a lot. It's where I got some of the good ideas from. But this idea about the end of the 9 to 5, and so equally the second big change that we've made is saying we used to have core hours, we've got rid of core hours. Our office in central London is open from 7 in the morning till 7 at night. And so what only are we saying is there's greater flexibility about how often you're in the office and where you want to be based. Your split between home and work is actually, we want to give you greater flexibility in the working day. So if you want to avoid public transport, you want to come in crack of dawn and then leave at lunchtime, you can do that. Because if you want to come in late, you want to come in at lunchtime and work to 7 o'clock at night here in the office, equally that's fine. So giving people some minimum parameters and getting rid of the 9 to 5 are the two big things that we've changed.
Thank you, David. I mean, I knew everything you were doing. I didn't know that, so that's really helpful. Thank you very much. Alex, I'd like to pose the same question, but if I may, just before, I didn't mention at the start that there is a question functionality. If anybody would like to ask any of our speakers questions as we go along, please do type in the box, and our speakers will be available to reply. So thank you, David. Alex, over to you. How did Adecco evolve in light of the pandemic?
It's very interesting listening to David's response there, because there are a lot of synergies, and I think in some ways you're absolutely right. It's all about that preparation and what you do in advance of something like this happening that really determines how you react to a crisis like this. But the Adecco Group, being a global HR solutions organisation, we were able to take a significant lead from our global and European colleagues in terms of their response to COVID-19, as they were a few weeks ahead of the UK and Ireland in managing the pandemic. And they provided us with invaluable insight and support, having already experienced some of the initial challenges. And that helped us a lot in navigating how to deal with our 3 core audiences, because of course we have more than just the colleague audience, we have our clients and our candidates to think about. And our immediate focus was on orienting virtual working, of course, and advising on government policy. We had to do a lot of redeploying teams. It was really important that we had minimal disruption to the teams, and that meant that where we had big spikes or peaks in certain areas, we moved teams into different roles in order to keep them working, and also identifying new tech solutions. And without doubt, there's many new transferable skills that we have all learnt throughout this period. And I think what we learned very quickly was that the speed of internal change had to match the speed of the external change that was going on in the market. And from the start, we set out 4 key phases of recovery and change. So we had react, prepare, bounce back, and reimagine. And I'm pleased to say we're now firmly into bounce back and focusing our time and energy on reimagine. And with decisions and changes really being made that historically would have taken years to come into fruition. So keeping teams upbeat and motivated has never been more important. And I think this is something that we found to be incredibly important when working in an agile way and where people are not in the office together every day. And particularly in the early phases. And, you know, I'm a big believer that morale is the absolute key to productivity and ultimately to retention during and post the pandemic. In fact, we did some research during the lockdown phase period that found that nearly 1 in 5 employees said that the company that they work for, or that they did work for if they'd been furloughed, was not treating them well during the pandemic. And this is particularly true of the younger workers. So nearly a quarter of those aged 18 to 24 years old said they did not feel that their employer was treating its staff well during the crisis, in comparison to only 13% of slightly older employees between 35 and 44 who said the same. So it really does show how important it is to treat people well in times of a crisis in particular, and that's what people really are going to remember. And we have and still are prioritising making sure that employees are supported during this time, because we're still absolutely not back into a steady state at all. Whether that's encouraging mental and physical well-being or creating a real sense of community virtually, which is a very different skill set from leaders than it is when people are working together in an office, and really encouraging colleagues to return if they want to return, and understanding what's required to get the best from the people that you have at this time is really, really critical. And as David said, you know, we're preparing now and starting to that journey of our people returning to the offices. We have now 63% of our offices are now open. We too did surveys with our colleagues to really understand what individual needs were. And these really differed from some people being desperate to get back to the office where they've been working. You know, you've heard these stories many times, and it's absolutely true. People working in shared houses, in their bedrooms, off their ironing boards, and they were ready to come back to the office, to others who really were very concerned about coming back and had different reasons for that, and in particular maybe health concerns around returning. And so we absolutely knew we needed to have a very flexible approach and a very sensitive approach in terms of how we really dealt with that. And I know you asked David the question, sort of, what has it taught me, and what, you know, what will you take forward and leave behind? And I think the learnings for me really are that the changes that we've made in the pandemic really prove that we can work effectively remotely. And we were able to deploy a remote workforce with relative ease, again, as David said, through planning. And productivity so far has been strong, and in particular, particularly in areas where we have transactional work. However, our research does show that the hybrid working pattern is absolutely preferable for most. And the majority, so 77% of UK employees say a mix of office-based and remote working is the best way forward. And there are some definite positives in working in an office, though, including, of course, building relationships, building that culture and collaboration. And, you know, regrettably for us, we have had to furlough some colleagues, and sadly, we've had to make some colleagues redundant. And this has been an incredibly difficult period for everyone, notwithstanding the colleagues themselves who have found themselves in that position. But I have to say, I cannot commend those colleagues enough for the way that they've dealt with the situation, both the colleagues in that situation and the people who've been handling it, for their just true professionalism, which says so much about those individuals. And in fact, from this group, despite their circumstances, they have given feedback through our pulse surveys that they've hugely appreciated the open and honest approach throughout this period, from leadership in particular. And I think that's what's so important, is keeping people informed and being honest and upfront and real. You can't get away from what's going on in the world. So actually, people just want to be hugely informed, and dialing up that communication is so critical at times like this. Absolutely,
thank you. And I'm sorry to hear about your redundancies. I don't think you're unique in that position. That's no. So many companies currently. Thank you both very much for those insights. Some really interesting kind of points that you both raise, I think particularly, are about keeping morale up and to, you know, kind of keep people's spirits, keep them feeling aligned, that kind of human-centric leadership approach. How do you
Who's going to go first? Do you want, Alex? After you, you go. Do you want to go first?
So yeah, can do.
Yeah.
So I think I've got a sort of mantra that I live and die by around my personal values, which I share regularly with my teams. And so the first one is around work ethic. And, you know, I think it's no surprise or coincidence that the very best who continue to get promoted and rise through any organisation in the company work longer, harder and are tougher than the rest. So being resilient is incredibly important. So keeping your glass half full, even on the most challenging of days, which I think we've experienced more than ever in the last 6 months. And don't wait for someone else to motivate you. You have to be able to motivate yourself. Making a decision is my third one. So it may not always be the right one. And it's important that people know you make mistakes. We all do. There's nothing worse for me than people who just sit on the fence and don't make decisions. They just slow the organisation down. And if you do make a wrong call, what's so important is that you're humble enough to admit it and learn from it and accept that it happens to everybody and move forward. And of course, try not to keep making it. Don't make it again. Having a really measurable plan and getting on with it. So holding yourself and your team accountable and being comfortable in your environment to call people out if they are not doing what they said they're going to do. Empowerment is an incredibly important one, and one I think that I've seen more than ever through the pandemic. So creating an environment where people feel comfortable to challenge others, but respectfully challenge others, where people are heard, and remember to, I always say, just remove the negative players. I always call them the mood hoovers from your team immediately, because I think they just get you down. They zap the energy from the room and they just don't help you to move forward. And I think sometimes you've got to make brave decisions for the rest of your team. It's not about one person, it's about your collective team and how they feel every day. And that environment and culture is what drives that productivity. And my final one, and probably the most important one, and one that's very close to my heart, is fairness. So being fair and treating people inclusively and equally, regardless of their position or role. And, you know, you mentioned that with middle management, you know, it gets noticed, it gets appreciated, and more than anything, it builds respect and trust. And I think that's so critical. And in terms of sort of the inclusive values and behaviours and how we sort of make sure that they live and breathe every day, is that I think you have to behave how you expect others to behave. And role modelling is so critical from leadership, and not just from senior leadership, from every level of leadership. And everyone knows that action speaks louder than words, to coin a phrase. And if your team see you acting in a certain way, they understand what's expected of them, and people mirror people. They want to feel involved. They want to feel a part of something. And I think on the flip side of that, always be prepared to have difficult conversations with people and call people out. When you see behaviours that you don't appreciate, or when any leader in the organisation sees a behaviour, whether it's somebody in their team or somebody in somebody else's team, that don't fit in with our values, respectfully calling people out is critical. It's what's expected, and be clear where the boundaries lie. Otherwise, it really can destroy an incredibly positive workplace culture. Like we said, one or two people behaving inappropriately or not in line with the way you expect or your leaders behave can really kill it. And ultimately, respect is everything.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Thank you. Very, very great advice there. David, can you add anything to that?
Well, I mean, Alex pretty much name checked the actual values of the financial services compensation scheme, and we hadn't conferred in advance. So our organisational values are accountability, challenge, and collaboration. Absolutely every single person should take accountability for their actions, and we should also hold each other to account to the highest standards. We should be able to challenge each other, as Alex said, constructively, in order for us to collaborate to deliver the best outcome for each other. You know, I think that, and I equally think that role modelling is essential. And I think that you have to be very, very clear, as Alex said, about defining your expectations. You know, I think we're very upfront as an organisation at FSCS. We say this is an organisation that makes a difference and in which you can make a difference. So actually, we're prepared to give you lots of stuff. We're prepared to create an amazing environment for you to work in and think about your reward and invest in you. But equally, it's a relationship, and we expect something back from you in return. And also, I think that where the cultural journey that we've been on is that, you know, shifting culture to being an adult to adult culture, that this is, you know, our organizational journey. You know, if I was talking to you 7-8 years ago, you know, we had quite a parent-child culture. You know, I'm doing what the executive are telling me to do. And, you know, and if I don't like it, I'll sit there with my arms crossed and I'll be a bit of a mood hoover. We certainly had some of those. And, you know, but actually going, no, in an adult to adult thing is actually, no, we are all in this together, genuinely. And you are right, we wouldn't be delivering the performance that we are. I was on a call yesterday with our engagement crew. So these are representatives from every team in the organisation and members of our board. So and our board, non-executive directors, were asking them, you know, how do you think the organisation has responded to the crisis? And, you know, what was deeply, you know, quite moving for me, it was to hear colleagues, you know, unprompted say, we are so lucky to work for the FSCS. What an amazing organisation.
That's amazing.
You know, but they're equally, because they're motivated, to Alex's point, because they go, you know, actually, we're taking the right signals from senior leadership. We've got the right people in our management. And, you know, the last thing, you know, as Alex said, you know, and you have to call it out. I think if people are not behaving, you know, I think once you've been really clear about your expectations, if people aren't behaving in that way, then you have to challenge it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And David, you just mentioned about 7 to 8 years ago, the kind of parent-child versus parent-parent relationship that we're kind of striving for now, and removing that hierarchy. Do you both think that leadership has evolved rapidly over the pandemic, and what skills do you think are important in a future leader?
I think that I think in all manner of different ways, and I've said this a lot in other interviews. The crisis is a massive accelerator. That is what it has accelerated. So I don't necessarily think these are new things or new concepts or new ideas. Let's talk about flexible working, just, you know, for a second. I was attended Flexpo, you know, last year as part of a panel discussion, you know, taking questions from the audience. How do I build the business case for flexible working? How do I successfully write my flexible working form? How do I get my boss to understand that flexible working is a benefit? Well, that's redundant. I mean, that's absolutely, I mean, you would be laughed off of the stage if, you know, as an employer, you said, oh no, flexible working doesn't work. Of course it doesn't, and it's never going to work. I mean, what do you think we've all been doing for the last 9 months? So you know, that's a really good example of, there was already a debate and a dialogue about flexible working. It's massively leapt forward. To Alex's point, we're now talking about hybrid working, and that's a different discussion. That's actually about how do you make that model work. I think the same is true for leadership. We've been talking about, you know, the high EQ leader, and that leaders needed to move away from the transactional and more into the transformational, that leaders needed to be better networked, that leaders needed to have greater soft skills, that they needed to demonstrate greater empathy. These aren't new. I don't think these are new ideas. What it is that it's completely sped that whole dialogue up. Because one of the things that has happened as a result of the crisis is the weird paradox, I think, is that whilst we have all been socially distanced and remote from each other, actually, I think we've been pulled closer together, because actually this form of communication is incredibly intimate, and we've been seeing into each other's lives. You know, I do joke with my boss, Caroline, you know, that I've made her children, you know, podcast webinar stars, and I've never met them, but I talk about them all the time, because Alex appears on virtually, not this Alex, but Caroline's son, younger son Alex. I mean, I could tell you what snacks he likes because he appears on virtually so many calls. But and I think that's I genuinely think that's a positive thing. I think it's a good thing that we live in the flow of life, and we see that. So I think, but for a lot of leaders, that is a new skill. And
Yes.
actually, when you ask, how are you? Not in that, how are you? Don't really want a response. Actually, genuinely, how are you? You know, how we deal, as Alex was saying, how you keep people connected and engaged when we're doing this remotely. How you might have to be checking in on somebody's mental health. All of the remit of leadership is so much broader and more human. Now, for some of us, you know, that's how we are as leaders. For a lot of leaders, that's not what they do.
Scary.
So I think it's quite a scary space to be. So I think that's what it's accelerated, which I think is a positive.
I think so too. And Alex, thank you, David. In a world where people want to bring their whole selves to work and they no longer want to have a professional persona and a family that isn't discussed, how do leaders kind of manage that? Do you think it's very important as a leader to be very human and very kind of, yes, I am a mother or a father, or I've got whatever that might be? How important do you think that is moving forwards?
I think it's incredibly important, as David has just said, it has just been accentuated beyond. We have all had we've all had a lens into each other's lives, personal lives, that we haven't previously had. And I think it's made people connect better, more comfortable with one another. I think the key to really humanizing workforces is for leaders to really get to know their people. And like you said, David, when you ask, how are you, you really mean, how are you? But this does take time and effort. And you have to make that time if you want to be successfully connected with your teams. And I think building those strong relationships is all part of our business, has become much more of a top priority. And I think I know most of my UK&I colleagues in the Adecco group, but I've been here a very, very long time. But what I find is that, by listening to those people and understanding what's happening in their world, personally and professionally, it's so important, and it gives you so much more credibility as a leader. And celebrating and really championing everyone's differences and being wholly inclusive with that, and understanding and asking questions and being inquisitive. That everybody loves talking about themselves, and it's not because it's the right thing to do, it's because you want to do it and being genuine about it. And I think that's what attracts and retains people within our organisation, is that people actually genuinely know you care about them as individuals, as well as ensuring that we are a profitable organisation. And I think also talking to people around your business at all levels is the best pulse check you can get of what's really going on. You can talk to your leaders regularly, and you can have reviews with your direct team, but actually having a pulse check with every person in your organisation, no matter what job they do, really tells you what's going on and really helps you to understand whether the organisation is what your surveying tells you it is. And I think, as David said, during the pandemic, we've played a really, really strong part in helping to humanise leaders, and some are more comfortable with it than others, but it's absolutely critical to the future of business. And I mean, I can't tell you how many video calls I've been on where my husband's walked in, my daughters have walked in, the dog starts barking in the middle, and at times it's so distracting. But actually, do you know what? The amount of people who've said to me, oh, it's so lovely to actually see your daughter, or, oh, what did your daughter do? And, how old's your son? How old's your dog? When did you get your dog? The funny thing is that actually you really, really do feel more connected to colleagues who kind of come into your life on that personal level. And that strengthens the relationship, and it really creates a bond that I think helps to really retain people in your organisation as a whole.
Thank you very much. You've both touched on retention as kind of a key theme, but we haven't talked about it kind of in its own right. We've also talked about the future being hybrid. And David, I love your optimism about, people kind of how could they refuse flexible working or not discuss it. But I don't think this audience watching this, the reason that we're all here is to talk about, how do we move forward in a flexible and agile way. But I do think there are companies out there, certainly we hear stories in our candidate event of organisations that are expecting to go back to, 9 to 5, doors locked, but belt and braces, the old school way of working. So I think I hope it's rapidly accelerated, and I think it has in majority of organisations, but I do feel for some people with organisations that just cannot understand it.
Well, and interesting, Maddy, to that point about, you're talking about retention. Well, I think it'd be really interesting to see what their retention rates are, because I'd be fairly certain, if that was me, I'd be going, is this the sort of organisation that I want to work for?
And people are. That's why they're registering for Flexpo, to find an employer that is more inclusive.
Yeah.
But on that note about flexible working, we had a question that we wanted to put to you around how important is flexible working about future retention, and I think you've both agreed that it is with what we've covered. Alex, you raised an interesting point earlier about the survey that you did, that the kind of under 25s felt that they hadn't been as well looked after as older people. Well, they're the future workforce potentially, as well as the people coming out of school. Why do you think that is, and how do we improve upon that as leaders to make sure that we do retain and attract future talent?
So I think, the pandemic has absolutely shown us that teams can work effectively when they're not all under one roof together. And another survey we did in 2019, it showed that only 30% of UK employees had experienced working from home. And that was actually an ONS survey. Now, an enormous amount of employees are doing so. And at the Adecco group globally, more than 80% of our 35,000 global colleagues worked remotely during lockdown. And so it proves it's absolutely possible to do, and everybody knows that now. But saying that, I do still think a blended approach is the most effective way forward. I think that human interaction is incredibly important in building that strong culture and feeling of belonging, which, as I mentioned earlier, is so important to me. And as we were just discussing, wandering around the office and talking to colleagues in the business with you at all levels is not an easy thing to do when you're working remotely and you're on Teams calls back to back all day. And that face-to-face touch point with all members of the team is just so important in the relationship building. And particularly, I think, with newer colleagues to the organisation. Many people who have worked in the company for many years and who understand the culture and who are more comfortable and confident just full stop working because they've been doing it for longer, they have more life experience. It's one thing, but I think newer colleagues, and something David and I have discussed previously, newer colleagues who've been remote onboarded through this period and who actually don't have a pulse check of the culture of your organisation. They haven't had the coffee station chat. They haven't had the opportunity to go for a drink or dinner with colleagues from work. It is a different experience. And I think the remote working piece, particularly with those colleagues, it's so important that we really dial up that communication. One check-in per week with those colleagues is never going to be enough to really make them feel safe and secure and a part of something. So being more deliberate in the way that we communicate is critical. And what I guess I mean by that is that people need to feel included and informed, and we have to talk to them and communicate with them on a much more regular basis and a very consistent and concise way. And not just about business, as we've discussed, they need to also feel like you want to hear about them personally. And you've got to make time for that, which isn't easy when we're going through a pandemic and there's a lot of new pressures, as well as the previous pressures that were on businesses to perform. So I think, again, it comes down to trust. And I think people do have to earn that trust. But I think also leadership teams have to communicate way more regularly in order for people to feel a part of it. So I'm a big believer in moving forward with this hybrid piece, but also, as you discussed earlier, that there are new skills and experiences that we are going to need to support people to really develop, because that is something that not everybody is born with, and they are things that you learn, and you learn them through experience. So I think that's a very big agenda for us, is making sure that people feel comfortable. You can't just assume that people are able to do it, because it's a very different environment.
Absolutely, thank you. David, can I bring you in on this? I'm sure you've probably got things to add.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is that, as Alex said, this is a conversation that we've had quite recently, is that, yes, we've been onboarding people, through this period who've never been to the office. So, never been to the office, they've never had a face-to-face meeting with their team, they've not had a face-to-face meeting with their line manager. And so how and we pride ourselves on our organisational culture. And so much of that culture is the intrinsic day-to-day interaction that happens when you are physically around people, and also you're physically in a particular space, because we've designed the space in a particular way for collaboration and concentration and all of that good stuff. So I think that is a really interesting new challenge. How do you keep people connect? It's not even connected, because as Alex said, if you're already part of the culture, that's fine. it's the thing of like going, actually, you've never had you've not had that experience. You've not been to an away day. You've not had a team meeting. You've not had So I just think that's a really interesting. That's an interesting new landscape for us, and I think we're going to have to develop new tools and new techniques in order to do that.
Thank you both so much. Before we wrap things up, because I'm aware of the time, and I could talk to you both for hours because I'm learning an awful lot, and I'm sure our audience are too. I'm going to put you on a spot because this is a tricky one. But if you, as we've discussed and we've touched upon, Adecco and Financial Services Compensation Scheme were ahead of the curve really when the pandemic hit, and you had already embraced flexible working. You have very inclusive cultures, and you kind of would not good to go. Nobody predicted the entire workforce going remote, but you were potentially further ahead. For other leaders that aren't as far ahead in their journey and they've perhaps not had as good an experience during this period, if you had one piece of advice to offer to them, what would that be? One piece. This is tricky because there's been a lot, so much covered. Alex, would you like to go first?
Okay.
Just preempting David saying, Alex, do you want to go first?
So I think my one piece of advice during pandemic, and also more so even moving forward, is never to underestimate the power of trust, especially in the current climate where it's been hugely amplified through remote working. It's essential to maximise productivity and, as you mentioned earlier, to attract and really retain talent of the people. Trust has always been key, but not only do you have to trust your people, you also have to be a credible leader, and you have to trust and respect your teams in return. And if a leader's faced with a crisis situation and lacks trust from their people, they'll find it almost impossible to steer the business through the challenging time. And I think empowering people is trusting people, and at times like this it's absolutely critical. And actually interestingly, there was a piece of research done by Harvard Business Research Journal about high trust companies compared with people who work in low trust companies. And this report said that there's 74% less stress, 106% more energy, 50% higher productivity, and 13% fewer sick days. And the engagement was highest in high trust organizations. And I think for me, that tells you everything that you need to know about what you need to do in a crisis situation in order to keep colleagues engaged.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you for sharing that. I'm astounded by how many facts you can retain as well. There's that's good. Thank you. David, same question to you, please.
I just want to echo Alex's observations about trust, and Maddy, you and I have talked about that before. Yeah. I always feel it's my duty to mention the work of Stephen M.R. Covey in this space. If you've not read The Speed of Trust, everybody, that's my recommended business book, because actually it highlights all of the stuff that Alex talked about. High trust cultures in organizations do improve organizational performance, whether that be and your bottom line if you're a profit-making organization. And we absolutely have seen that. We've made it central. That our work with Franklin Covey has been central to our culture change. My top tip, and I say this often, it is progress, not perfection. I think that we have to. Oh, my lights have gone off in this room. That's because I'm not moving. I'm going to do this. The lights will thing. My lighting has changed. And what do I mean by that is I think that you have to try stuff. You will not always get things right. You know, as you move forward. Alex was talking about bravery earlier. I think that's absolutely central. And I think that, you know, we have to be bold in taking steps as we try to build back better. And we won't know all of the answers, and the environment is uncertain, but we will learn as we go. And I think sometimes organizations, they get paralyzed by their search for the perfect answer. You know, I've got to have mitigated all 482 risks in order to do something. Well, you'll never move forward. You won't make any progress. So I think progress, not perfection. Try stuff.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for your time and your wisdom and sharing both of your experiences. I completely agree. I think they sound like fantastic organisations to work for. And I sincerely hope that our leaders watching this can take away some great tools and tips to imply in their own organisation. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.